We are with Dr. Eduardo Sanchez Lazo to talk about the Eucharistic miracle of Tixla, which he personally analyzed. Doctor, could you tell us about the history of your analysis? When I was hired to examine the situation, I was told on the first appointment with Dr. Ricardo Castagnon that they wanted to know if what was placed on the surface was planted by someone or if it came from the same surface. My answer was, that was not coming out of there. Of course it was not coming out of there. Surely someone put it there, but my job is obviously to research it and explain why I believe this. I imagined at first that maybe they were investigating a robbery and they wanted to know if they left fingerprints or any other traces on one of the objects in order to identify the people responsible. Therefore, I said yes, that we would investigate. I am a surgeon. I have a specialty in legal medicine. I have a master's degree in public health and hospital administration. I have a doctorate in criminal law, as well as an honorary doctorate. That has been my academic training within this legal area. Indeed, I work for the justice institutions, either for the Attorney General, of Justice of some states, or the Republic. Those are my workplaces. Hearings in the courts, criminal or civil, that is my world, ideally. The professor asked me to determine if it was blood and if it was human blood. At that time, we did the chain of custody. The sample remained with me. I carried it in a temperature-controlled cooler and took it to the laboratory. I immediately told the team that we had a sample to see if it was blood. When we determined that it is in fact blood and that it is human blood, I informed the professor and asked him what is next. Do I give you the report or what do we do? He asks me what else we can do. I told him that I don't have a lot of samples, but we could continue investigating until there is more. If you allow me, I will. He said, okay, let's continue. He told me that he was interested in knowing if it was human blood. If it was, what was its DNA to make a comparison? I told him I needed to know what I was going to compare it against to see if it had any identity that we could recognize. He told me, don't worry about what we're going to compare it to. Another team will take care of that. You just extract the DNA. I think it is important to mention here that I obviously charge for my services. I obtained financial remuneration under these circumstances. So I committed myself to extracting DNA to deliver the results, and that was my job. The most expensive part of this process is the genetics part. Up to this point, it was part of genetics. It was something very interesting. I will use the screen for you to see. Right now I am entering the genetics sample. Here's the genetic sample. The equipment recognizes that there is DNA. But when I try to amplify it to make a polymerase sequence, I go to the next one, and at this point there is nothing. So my team told me there is no DNA. I said, how come there is none? We just identified it. Did they contaminate the sample or what? They said, no way. You stay put and we'll run it again step by step. Again, we extracted the sample of almost 1 centimeter long by 3 centimeters long. From there, we had to go do magic to be able to extract the largest amount of sample. We had to get as much as we could, and usually the samples run out. I said, okay, let's do the test again. I took the sample, entered it into the genetics equipment, and it recognized that there was DNA. What follows is to amplify and run the sequence, but nothing appeared. So they told me, you see, you either contaminated it or did something to it. I told them, of course, I did not contaminate it, but indeed it was erased. It disappeared completely. There is no explanation as to why the information got erased when we wanted to pass it from one side to the other. I have worked on more than 1,200 genetic cases. Whenever we find DNA, it is obliged to amplify and show a sequence in the sample. But this time, it just does not show. On this particular case, it does not show. So I told the professor, because he had paid for this, Professor, here is the exam. There is no DNA, and here is the money because I could not extract it. He asked me if I had any sample left, and I answered that I had very little left. He said, okay, I'm not going to tell you anything yet, but what can we get out of there with what's left? I told him that we could do immunology, immunohistochemistry. He said, do what you have to do, doctor. I asked him what about his payment, and he told me to keep it until I have finished the process. He said, When we finish all this, tell me the results and we will see what we do. I took back the sample fragment that I had left. At this time, it was roughly 3 by a millimeter. The sample was very small. I took it to a lab to do the chemical immunology, and again we found human blood. Every time we found blood in the forensic area, what we were really looking for is the typology to be able to see which type of people it could match. After the typology exam, we do the genetics exam. In this case, it was the other way around. We already found the blood, and it was human blood. We continued to see the typology. It was type AB. It was rare, and very rare, but possible. Yes, there are people who have that type of blood. Then we wondered what to do. So we went to the microscope to see what we had. I had already been analyzing for 3 months, 90 days. When I looked at it under the microscope, it was a fresh sample. Generally, when we obtain a sample from an intervention site or crime scene, after 48 hours, the blood dries. We can no longer find shaped or non-shaped or fresh cells. But here, 90 days had already passed, and we continue to find white blood cells. My team told me, "What do we do?" I told them, "I don't know. I never gave the sample away. It had always been with me. So there is no possibility that the sample had been changed in order to find living tissue in it." They asked me, "What if we do cytochemistry to determine what type of tissue this was?" I told them, "Let's do it. Let's see what we can get out of all this." We ran glycophorin A, if I'm not mistaken, and it came out positive to muscle tissue. The question was, what type of muscle would this tissue be bleeding from? We checked and it was positive. It was heart muscle tissue. But why from the heart, we wondered. So we ran the exams again, and it was confirmed once again that it was tissue, that it was bleeding, and that it was heart tissue. At this point, I did not know what was going on, but I knew that it was not something that happened suddenly. It was not something common. There was no possibility that blood, the white blood cells, could stay alive, intact, lasting as long as the sample was with us. We submitted the sample for chemical analysis. It was in contact with cytochemistry, immunology, and despite this, there was a leukocyte reaction. He, meaning Dr. Castagnon, says, "I am interested in knowing if that reddish stain that we now know is blood, someone put it there, or if it comes from the inside." I said, "Okay, I'll see what we can do." So we submitted the sample. It was a host that all of us who have been to church know. The thickness of a host is approximately 1/10 of a millimeter. It is very thin. When it comes into contact with any liquid, it starts to fall apart. But this was not the case here. Here, its physical structure had not been deconfigured. It was maintained. Here comes the other most surprising part. When I introduced that sample for a lateral electron microscopy, we first put it in and we didn't see anything. We could only see a red surface, like strong red, and below, a darker red, but it didn't let me see more. We tried it laterally, and despite the fact that the tissue is very thin, it could not be seen that the reddish liquid that we now know to be blood, due to the thickness of the top red, exceeds normal sight and seems to be stained on both sides of the same dimension. However, when we introduced it to electron microscopy, we can see as if there were veins, but the hosts don't have veins or arteries or anything like that at all. What appears in the observation is that this liquid comes out of a third part of the thickness of the host. We are talking about approximately 1/10 of 1 millimeter. That 10th part, we split it in 3, and that third remains intact. And from the other third, we can see how a thread of reddish stain comes out and expands on the surface that we have. That is amazing. I'm still investigating. It is a technology that we should have in 50 to 100 years, but we still do not have it here. Or if it were a technology from another country or military, that could do that. But in reality, it just does not exist. There is no single way to keep alive that blood flow through that host, and this allows us to see the presence of white blood cells. There is no way. There is just no way to see that. When I informed the professor, he told me, "Very well, doctor. I think that we should stop there." Then he asked me one more question. I wonder if there was a possibility of extracting a mitochondria. I said, well, if we have white blood cells, we can look for the cell nucleus, and maybe we could find the mitochondria. I did not know why or what would be the point of finding a mitochondria. I commented to the professor about the results I obtained. First, I thought that my intervention was going to end with the professor. I thought my research would end there. I did not know that this was going to have so many stages to investigate, to be confirmed or discarded, to tell me if what I had said was true, or to say that there was a lying forensic to all of Mexico. I had no idea. I gave the professor the results, and he said, "Very good, doctor. Now these results are going to the Vatican because they have to be confirmed by the Phenomena or Miracles department there." I was like, oh my goodness. So I checked my spelling to see if I did anything wrong, but I had already delivered all my work. When I asked the professor why the DNA did not come out, he answered me, "Remember, doctor, that Jesus Christ was the Son of Mary and the Holy Spirit. That is why it was so important to him to find a mitochondria, because if he found a mitochondrion, there would be a possibility of looking for a maternal DNA." It was not until this moment I realized the magnitude of what I was doing. This is where I realized how far the documents that I had delivered would go. The furthest that my legal medical examinations of forensic investigations have gone has been the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for any compliant or recommendation previously made. The people who were more difficult to convince were the doctors, the professionals, the chemists. They obviously attacked me with everything. I felt bad because I don't work alone. I work with a team. Sometimes they are more experts in certain subjects than I am. They are experts in immunology, immunological cytochemistry. There are other experts with me who work on this part, but suddenly they would question me, and I did not know what to answer. However, I knew it was real because I had seen it. They did not believe in it. Sometimes they don't believe even though they have all the evidence in their hands. They don't believe it. They do not understand it. It is like saying to them, "This is a pen, touch it, so that you can see that it is a pen." They touch it, grab it, and say, "No, it is not a pen." That is how bad it is. Today I can assure you that it exists. Did it happen? Yes, it happened. Can a host bleed and leave living tissue? Yes, it can, because I saw it. I did not designate someone on my team to do it. I was present there. I saw it. Hopefully that message can reach all people. It is difficult to convince a skeptical person, even if we have all the evidence. When I asked the professor for advice, he told me, "Doctor, just say what you have observed. Do not try to convince them because a stubborn person will never understand, even if they get all the evidence in front of them, they will never understand."